digitizing biology will help to put in standards. It'll help us to identify bad actors, bad designs, and bad programs. It'll help regulators actually see what's going on. It'll help investors figure out where the money's going and who's good. It'll allow people to really put their investments and time and energy into things that they think are important as it just becomes more transparent. So it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be accidents, that there aren't going to be mistakes, that there aren't going to be bad actors. If anything, the internet has taught us if it can happen, it will happen. And I don't think we can be naive about synthetic biology. All the dynamics from the internet of that one medium, it's going to show up in SynBio. And there's some things that we should really be on the lookout for, to prevent, as much as possible that type of behavior.
Hello, Andrew.
Hi.
How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Jesse. Nice, quiet time here in the country, as you can see.
Yeah, it's beautiful. What is the cutting edge of synthetic biology today? What is synthetic biology?
Well, first of all, what is it? Because a lot of people watching this may not know, including myself.
Yeah, synthetic biology is really the digitization of life science. That's the biggest overview. And some people have given it functional descriptions like, oh, it's a set of tools and processes and that are making it easier to engineer biology. But really, I look at it as the growing digitization of biology, which is turning life into a programmable medium. It's giving us, it's digitizing genetic engineering, which is allowing the work that we do in life science to be done faster, better, cheaper, and in groups. Because you can't scale a laboratory so 1,000 people can work in that lab. But if you're working in synthetic biology, you're working with digital files that can be shared globally.
Now, they can be shared globally, but a lot of this work is happening in Boston. Is there a reason for that?
There's hubs all over the world. So in the US, probably the hubs that have emerged are in Boston, Cambridge. The other one is here in the Bay Area. But New York is starting to get a very strong cluster as well. And I don't want to exclude smaller clusters. There's anytime people come together and start using these digital tools, they can start to aggregate and connect to others. But around the world, the UK is very strong. I work with a group in Italy that's very good. France is coming up very quickly. China is a very strong contingent of folks working in this area. So it's certainly, and even I'm an advisor to Synthetic Biology Africa. So it's appearing in emerging economies as well.
So if we look down the road, and we hear the term synthetic biology, but does this mean better, more customizable therapies for all people eventually? Is this the next, when we say precision medicine or next version of, if you're looking 5 or 50 years out, is that where we're going?
Well, I kind of look at it through the lens of what I've seen happen in my lifetime with computing. I'm almost 60 years old, so I've seen a lot of computing at this point. And at the beginning, it was really only available to very elite groups, large companies, academic universities, and the military. And then when I was in my late teens, it started to become personal. And we got the Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs founding Apple out of a garage, and et cetera. And it's built this incredible architecture that today is allowing us to have this conversation. And it's still evolving. I see synthetic biology as doing the same thing for life science. And yes, it will make better medicines, but it will change everything that biology touches. And biology touches everything. Like food is what we consume, every day, and that's biological. It's all biologically rooted. Medicines, absolutely, but materials, like we use wood for building most of our structures. It goes on and on. When you really start paying attention to where biology touches our life, you realize, oh, wow, it's everywhere. And we need to start thinking about biology in new ways if we're going to continue supporting the 8 billion people we have now and potentially adding billions more over the coming decades. So biology is going to play a bigger and bigger role in that.
So when we think about therapeutics, we sort of have an idea of an idealized state for a human being in terms of medicine. So do you think that, with synthetic biology, perhaps we'll go past where we are now, live longer, be able to have more memory, be able to improve upon nature?
I think so, but let's wind it back to what it can do for us today.
Yeah.
Diagnostics are so important. If you can't measure something, you really don't know how it's working. And diagnostics are something that could be revolutionized with this technology, because it's really speeding the digitization of results. So a few months ago, I got to see the first molecular electronic chip where you can actually attach single biomolecules to a chip. Mm-hmm. And this is ready for commercialization. That can change diagnostics. Like literally, it could make virus smoke detectors that just work 24/7, or do diagnostics on if your child is sick going into the hospital. What have they got? We think it's an infection. They can tell whether it's a cold or a flu or COVID or something else. That's just one area.
No, it's hard to get in that area. It's hard to get reimbursement for diagnostics. Traditionally, it's people, I don't know why, but they don't want to pay for diagnostics. So is there a market condition that has to be met in order to get adoption?
Put it this way, you and I have intersected for health for, almost 15 years now. And I'm Canadian. Like, the healthcare system in the United States is crazy. Like,
That's not the only thing that's crazy.
It's not the only thing that's crazy.
A lot of other
the least of our problems today.
We have a lot of problems, but anyway.
We need cheap diagnostics like that. I don't want to have just my doctor pick a few specific tests. I want them all, and I want them cheap enough that they can get a holistic image and build a digital me. And in fact, I've taken steps to go and build a digital me more than most people, because of a project that was at Autodesk, where I got to scan the outside of my body like they do with movie stars, as well as the inside, as well as put my genome into it. And yeah, absolutely, we need to do that. We need better diagnostics. We need better sensors. We can absolutely use synthetic biology to make important molecules and drugs that are going to keep us healthier. The COVID mRNA vaccine, actually most of the COVID vaccines were made using the tools of synthetic biology, which is why, the development cycle was really short. We condensed the clinical trial process to kind of speed it forward. But in the case of the mRNA vaccines with Moderna, like they said, it only took us, about 2 months, 2 days to design the drug, 2 months to manufacture the drug to clinical specifications. And then we kind of had these 7 months of testing. But yes, absolutely, synthetic biology is going to be a big part of keeping us healthy and discovering the markers in our code that determines whether we live longer or not, and eventually to start designing and making therapeutics that will help us live longer, happier lives. But that's a tricky one, because you really only get the data at the end of our life.
Right.
So, yeah.
So right now, you hear about people using CRISPR, and it's very targeted towards one set of things you can make, it hasn't scaled. So in a sense, does COVID allow us to scale faster the things that we've learned there?
I think COVID is going to push a new wave of both diagnostic technologies and manufacturing technologies, certainly for vaccines, but probably for related drugs as well, because mRNA technology can be applied in so many different ways. And as you know, I've been working to create a pathway for cancer, where if you give our team a cell computationally through these tools of synthetic biology, they can make a medicine just for you in a clinically relevant period of time. The synthetic biology tools allow that process. It's just a matter of putting it together and starting to gain practice with it.
So you could fine tune an immunotherapy in combination with the synthetic biology?
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, with one of the most significant immunotherapies, the CAR T therapies, they take for cancer to be in your body, your immune system is either shut down or blunted, or it simply doesn't recognize that cancer. That's the only way for the cancer to exist, because your immune system is constantly scanning our 50 trillion cells and systems looking for anomalies. So, in the case of the immunotherapy, they either have drugs now that can blunt the cancer cells actions to shut down the immune system. Those are checkpoint therapies, and they're pretty brilliant. But there's also these CAR T therapies where they remove your immune system cells and they reprogram them so that they now recognize the cancer and they infuse them back in. With enough practice, I think that they won't have to remove those cells from your body. I think that you'll be able just to drop the new program.
You know, George Church showed me an animation of a cell. You know, when I imagine cells, I imagine these sort of very slow moving things. And he showed me an animation. You know, he said, listen, this is an animation. It's a movie, not a real interaction, right? But it was so complex what was happening in the cell. How many different, like we have these tools, but what's the thought process around like, well, how do I take this problem apart? Because it could be the way it connects to the cell. It could be the therapy itself. It could be how it gets into the cell. There's all these things. How do you think about it creatively?
I get frustrated, honestly, because look, the example that I use in the non-cellular world, because remember, everything cellular is foreign to people simply because it's microscopic. Most people don't think at that level. They have no experience at that level with any cell. Don't even worry about a human cell. Think about E. coli, one of the simpler bacteria. But then take a look at what we've done with geospatial technologies. If you've ever used Google Earth, it's amazing. You have Earth in space, and you can type any address on the planet and you can literally fly in there and zoom in right to the particular building. And in some cases go into the building because we've built the computational framework to collect all of this geospatial data and layer it together and make it really accessible through cloud. Yeah, and through a web interface. We haven't done that scientifically for a single cell, even the simplest cell. And it's frustrating. So everyone is working with partial data, with non-standardized tools, with independent laboratories and reagents and hands at the bench. And the entire thing is noisy. And just replicating important experiments has been a challenge because oftentimes they simply don't replicate. When another lab group trying to follow the instructions and procedures, you know, so this is why personally, I've really championed what we call cloud labs. They're labs that are basically operated by robots. And if there's a well-known procedure, like extract DNA from this cell, you just drag and drop that procedure into your workflow and it does it. And kids can use it and program it. You don't have to set up an independent lab, and you get really high quality data in standardized formats coming out of that. So I think again, that going to the heart of synthetic biology, I think that digitization and automation process is absolutely going to propel us forward and open up synthetic biology to a larger community of practitioners, not all of whom come in from this, you know, from this, the left side with biology.
Yeah, that's my question for you, Andrew, which is how, you know, what is sort of the thinking in the field writ large? Are we studying this in school? Are there people specializing this? Are there the people that feel that it's something ethical? Or, you know, there's a lot of conversation that you kind of hear around synthetic biology because most people don't understand actually what is going on here. So what's sort of the state of things right now?
Oh, I would say it's a very early stage. Like, again, synthetic biology, I've been working in that area for almost 25 years, but it was way out on the fringe and only done with, you know, with elite groups at the beginning. And it started to open up around 2004 with a student program, an undergraduate program at MIT, and it really started to get some traction. And now, you know, almost 20 years later, that group has trained somewhere over like 50 or 60,000 students in this type of technology. So but that being said, even though there are companies worth billions of dollars in the space, a growing student program, more and more awareness of the term. And of course, you know, that's why we wrote the book, was to even keep piling on the awareness. It's still early days because it's not like computing. It's not like where you can sit down and immediately get started in synthetic biology if you're just interested in it. You can learn a little bit about it, but you can't start doing it like you can learn how to program. So it's early, but I think absolutely it's going to keep growing and it's not going to go away because it's so fundamental.
You know, how complex is a cell? Like, you know, we just think of them as little dots, but they have incredible complexity. They have worlds within them. You know, we talked about Google Earth, but it's not really Google Earth. It's as if Google Earth was deep and you had to navigate down into the bowels of it to try and find something.
Well, that's exactly right. So I use the example of Google Earth, and I move forward saying E. coli in some ways is more complex than Google Earth, like because we can keep going right down to the atomic level with a single cell. Given how much we've mapped of Earth and how much we could map of E. coli, I think we have the technology to do it today. And there are groups that do whole cell modeling. The first whole cell model was published out of Stanford, I believe, in 2012. And it was a breakthrough paper, it was actually described by Science as audacious, which was pretty awesome. And if you Google today, there is still whole cell modeling groups that are trying to develop these tools, but they just don't have the support of a large company like Google, et cetera, or Microsoft behind them to really integrate and build on these data sets. But I expect it to come. My last formal position was with Autodesk. And part of the reason why I loved Autodesk was because they build essentially digital twins. They build models and simulations that allow us to go and build really, really complex things in the world, like skyscrapers. And we absolutely need that if we're going to start programming even the simplest cells, let alone reprogramming our cells and and the systems made from ourselves.
But that's like a point that I feel that people need to understand, which is that relationship between what you're doing in this digital space and how it translates to the real world. And it's a back and forth reciprocal. You're able to try things, correct, and then you apply them in the real world. I think that's probably a or a narrative that's not out there yet.
Well, we probably don't have a big enough data set of the experiments to be able to know what we can use, or do we?
We don't yet, but this is where we're closing the loop with automation. And one of the areas that I've focused on, I'm a bottom-up kind of guy. Look, if a cell's too complicated, if a cell has too big a genome for me to synthesize, I'm going to go step back. And that's why I started working with viruses. Viruses aren't alive. They are literally the biological equivalent of a USB stick. So in the absence of a cell, it's an object, and you can model that object to atomic precision. That's important. Also, the genome is incredibly small, so we can sequence it easily. But today, we can synthesize the virus, which means we have full bit level control over the design of that particle and the payload it carries, which ultimately is packaged by that particle. So that's why I started a virus engineering company to really go and drive these ideas forward. And of course, then we have to connect that with the data on its actual use into a target cell. In this case, we were designing them to kill cancer cells. So then you have to start layering on, well, does it actually kill the cancer cell? Is it not killing normal cells, and all the deeper diagnostics? But that's the path that I started opening. It works. And I think eventually, as we all start to pile on an open framework, like we pile onto the internet, once we pile onto an open framework for life science, you're just going to see this snowball.
Can you talk about some of those you started early on, we talked about food, we talked about diagnosis and the, disease, and where are some of the other places that the life sciences touch that people watching may not even think that that's an area where this could go?
Well, materials is a big one.
So metals, anything you're going to work with, right?
Yeah, and more than that, we can also use it for just waste management. It's pretty well known in if you're doing wastewater management that you have these wastewater treatment plants. It's just basically microbes pulling stuff out of the wastewater. One of my favorite projects was a group of scientists that found an enzyme in, I believe, landfills that could digest PET plastic, like in our plastic bottles. And so they started working on that enzyme to optimize it and tune it. And now it can basically digest a plastic bottle in under a day, which is amazing. So, enzyme engineering right now is massive because enzymes are typically encoded with just a few thousand bits of genetic code. They do magical chemistry, like again, break down plastic bottles, but they keep our laundry detergent cleaning our whites whiter, and so on and so on. Plus, many of them can be used therapeutically as well, or as sensors. So that's going to be a giant one. But really, the one that most people understand today that is really going to start making a difference is food. Because we simply can't keep growing our agricultural footprint, to support billions more people. That's just,
The World Health Organization says we'll be at 9 billion in 20 years. I mean,
We'll
and
be a
then-
lot more now in this country because we're going to make a lot of people here. Okay. And it's just,
Well,
okay.
but the modeling is that it goes back down, right, to 6 billion or something, over time because of I mean, these are kind of wishful thinking things because we that's assuming that we stay at the same technological rate and place that we are now. But do you think that this can be used to clean up the environment and all the I mean, I don't even know that the earth can support 9 billion people, but
so I actually did a lot of thinking about that when I wrote the book. And when I went into it, I'm familiar with the UN graphs, and there's a pretty big error bar because it's like anywhere between 9 and 11 billion people peaking around 2050 or 2060 and then a decline. But as I wrote the book, I realized that's really thinking small. I actually believe this planet can support 100 billion people or more, and that it's not an energy problem. Our big fusion reactor in the sky gets up every morning. We just waste so much energy. Mm-hmm. But really, the way I started coming up with the 100 billion is I started thinking, well, right now we live on the hull of spacecraft Earth. Like we're really looking at it as just two-dimensional. Mm-hmm. The volume of Earth is massive.
Right.
And it turns out that even if you just start building down 30, 40, 50 feet, and you can do this anywhere on the planet, you can easily create enough space for, many billions more human, move a lot of factories underground, move a lot of transportation systems underground. So I think just working smarter and letting the Earth's surface be for non-humans as much as possible, I think is a really interesting idea we haven't explored enough.
Do you feel like when we go to Mars that we would bring synthetic biology along with, in the same way we go micro manufacturing and we, build tools that can manufacture things that we might need as opposed to, bring a wrench? Do you think it might be a tool that gets deployed for something like that?
I think it's essential because look, Mars doesn't sustain life. Anything we bring to Mars has to be life support units, and life support units includes oxygen manufacture and atmosphere manufacture and scrubbing, of course, energy production, waste management, because you don't want just crap piling up around your system, food production, and so on, plus health and medicine and all the other things that we need. We basically need to make most of that in place. So I've become really fascinated with life support systems, with what we look at as closed systems or circular systems. And we, as humans, we have very little experience in that. The one example everyone points to is the Biosphere 2 project in Arizona, which is, frankly, just not something you can fit into a spacecraft and move anywhere. But modernized, I think we could absolutely start to prototype closed systems here on Earth that we could literally pack up and ship to the moon or Mars or put in orbit. I put a scenario, and Amy and I wrote about that in one of our scenarios in the book. And again, scenarios are kind of fanciful looks at the future to kind of stimulate thinking. But it really got me excited, Jesse, because I thought, wow, we could actually plant seeds of new cities here. Mm-hmm. To satisfy our ambitions to go off world that could really, grow into giant sustainable cities here on Earth.
Well, I think that's the important thing. Let's fix the problems, to use that model that you're talking about and then to start to really solve problems all over the globe would be.
I forget his last name, the senator who went up, was in space, Mark Kelly for a year. Yeah. He lost a lot of muscle while he was up there. Do we think that synthetic biology might be a way of mitigating some of those things? Because, I assume that came from no radiation shield, basically, so that, what are your thoughts?
Well, his cancer risk is likely increased because of the increased radiation you get when you're in space. But the muscle wasting is just because you're in zero gravity. Like you literally don't have to pull your mass around. And so I don't think synthetic biology is actually going to help with much of that. I think it's actually going to be an engineering-based solution where we just get good enough to manufacture in space that we can make large enough structures that we can rotate and get centrifugal gravity. Right. So, once you have gravity in space, it's just like being here on Earth, and you won't have the same medical effects.
In high altitude, I'm thinking about in Tibet, they have an extra gene, that allows them to breathe and function at high altitude. Eventually, would that be something that we could do with synthetic biology, where if I'm going on a trip and I want to breathe well at high altitude, it might help.
You could probably do that now just with mRNA technologies, and especially if you need it in, just transiently. I expect to see an entire app store appear as we get better with mRNA programming and delivery systems and virus RNA programming and delivery systems, because the viruses can make permanent changes or more targeted delivery, because that's really what a virus is specialized in doing. But the mRNAs are pretty good as well. So I just think in general, programmable medicine is going to open up a completely new app store. And we'll look back in 20 or 30 years and just be kind of blown away, just as we were. I saw it was just like 15 years ago that the iPhone came out.
Yeah.
And of course, the App Store even surprised Steve Jobs, because he only wanted Apple developers putting apps in the App Store, and he thought 500 or 1,000 would be enough. And what we've learned is no, that's an entire ecosystem. And I expect to see synthetic biology do something very, very similar.
Now, they're not standards yet or universal standards. Is this a barrier, repeatability and standards?
Yeah, well, it's a problem in biology because biology is a little tricky. But this is where I think digitizing biology will help to put in standards. It'll help us to identify bad actors, bad designs, and bad programs. It'll help regulators actually see what's going on. It'll help investors figure out where the money's going and who's good. It'll allow people to really put their investments in time and energy into things that they think are important as it just becomes more transparent. So it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be accidents, that there aren't going to be mistakes, that there aren't going to be bad actors. If anything, the internet has taught us if it can happen, it will happen. And I don't think we can be naive about synthetic biology. All the dynamics from the internet of that one medium, it's going to show up in SynBio. And there's some things that we should really be on the lookout for, to prevent, as much as possible that type of behavior.
Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah.
I think people want to hear what could happen, the bad part.
Absolutely. Number one, I believe in transparency, just with this digital architecture we're making for life science, because anything that's done, kind of anonymously or in the dark, it is going to be suspect. In my books, life is a universal technology that we share with every other living thing. Let's keep it as transparent as possible. The types of things that we do know are people are going to hack the data. They'll hack your sequence files if they can and use it to market you crazy products. That could be weaponized. If you're the president of a country and that data is available, they could make potentially a targeted bioweapon. Our growing ability to fight infection, whether it's a microbial, viral, or a cancer, which is an infection of your own body with your own cells, those are all tools that can be weaponized. So we have to realize there are some people who will abuse these things. So there are checkpoints that you can put into place in the design software for these tools. You can put checkpoints in place where it goes from design to actual synthesis of the genetic code, which is what the cells run. There's a big checkpoint there at the synthesis. And then there's checkpoints you can put in place in the world, like biosensors. Is there a new virus circulating? Why do we have to wait until people get sick, to identify it? And so on and so on and so on. Biosecurity in general needs a giant upgrade. And a lot of people are recognizing this and starting to put their energy and investment into it. And I think it's just going to be one of the challenges for us as a species over the next 20 or 30 years.
Artificial intelligence, it seems like, there's a lot of computation going on. Do we need artificial intelligence to be trained on these data sets in order to come out with better outcomes?
Absolutely. AI and machine learning is crucial to these technologies, in my opinion, because there is just so much information. It's so complicated and it's all dynamic, happening in real time. And when it comes to patterns, AI is superior to humans. And it works 24/7, doesn't get tired, doesn't take vacations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a big part of the process. I think it's exciting. This is synthetic biology is biology not just for someone who's interested in living things. It's a data science. It's advanced robotics and automation. Increasingly, it's going to be part of the entire semiconductor world.
Right.
There will be kids who just become expert at coding metabolism and or organisms, without ever seeing a lab, and so on and so on. So I expect some really disruptive things to emerge from synthetic biology as we go forward.
Yeah.
Andrew, I want to know, you said earlier you've been working on your own self. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Are you able to, just in terms of what you're interested in exploring? Because that's so intriguing. That's sort of the final frontier, right? What does that mean when you're looking at your own personal biology?
So I took a really interesting point of view 15 or 20 years ago that I wanted to be very open source when it came to synthetic biology. I had been watching what was happening in the computer world between open source software, which basically powers most of the internet. And today you can find open source versions of most major programs, and then proprietary software. And again, proprietary software, some of it is very good, but there's always that price restriction that keeps people at it. So I wrote a chapter for Tim O'Reilly back in 2005, I believe, on open source synthetic biology, just because I'm so passionate that life, which is truly universal, the guts of every living thing on this planet are a very similar technology, from bacterium all the way up to you and me. I really believe that had to be open and it had to be transparent. So I actually open sourced most of myself. And I got a chance to do this when I was at Autodesk, because they had a project called the Parametric Human Project. You can go and Google it now. And they were doing this work. And I said, do you have a human for that project? And they said, not yet. And so I volunteered. And so they scanned me with the camera rigs that they use for actors. They put me in an MRI in Toronto for an afternoon. I just slept through most of it. I love MRIs. And then I donated I donated my genome. And now eventually all that data, I would like to see a group make an avatar engine that can just hoover up all of my 100,000 emails off of Google, Gmail, and blah blah blah. It would probably be Google that makes the avatar engine, but that I want that to essentially animate my avatar and give it a soul. There's a company called Soul Machines that does like really advanced chatbots. So, at some point, all of this will come together. And it's not because I think that's me and I'm going to live forever. I just think it's really interesting building kind of a digital version of yourself that becomes increasingly high resolution and eventually something that could even give a pretty good digital simulation of say a drug response, etc.
They'll dig you up in 100 years.
No, he'll still be here. He's not going anywhere.
Well,
I'm just saying,
Well, what I'm working on now is a biobank for people, because I truly want to be cloned after I'm dead. One of my articles of faith is that human cloning will be legal and safe and widely available sometime in the future, just because we already have monozygotic twins are clones, so it's kind of organic. It's not that hard. And so I want to bank myself today for being cloned in the future, so I expect that my code will have another go round.
It's funny, because if you bank yourself in another 10 years, you'll be a different person.
Well, not really. No, because you're going right down to one single genome when you boot up an embryo again. And it's kind of, I just find cloning fascinating. I've been tracking since Dolly all the animals that we clone. Of course, we clone bacteria and trees and plants pretty easily. But human cloning has this bar to it that I don't think actually is ethical. It's just unfamiliar. But my kids were made in a lab. I have 2 children. They were made in labs because we used IVF technologies. And back in the late 70s, that was pretty radical stuff.
Sure.
And today it's just like, any fertility clinic. What would you like? And would you like the embryos sequence pre-implantation? You want your baby 3D scanned, with our 3D ultrasound scanners, it's like, it's a completely different business.
Yeah.
Andrew, thank you. Tell us the name of the book, though, for people that want to read it, because
the book is called The Genesis Machine. It was written with a brilliant futurist by the name of Amy Webb. I adore her. It came out in February. And it's
Yeah.
basically a short history of synthetic biology, because the field is pretty new. It
Yeah.
transitions to some of the incredible dynamics that are happening in the world today, and goes into several future forward scenarios that are meant to be thought-provoking. And then it's all very well referenced, and really a great introduction for the layperson to this field of synthetic biology. And once you've got the idea of synthetic biology in your head, once you've heard the words, you'll see that it's actually popping up all around you. And it has been. It's one of those 20-year overnight successes. But
Yeah.
if you have kids today, chances are they're going to end up programming life the way I learned how to program computers earlier in my career.
Thank you, Andrew. This was fantastic.
Thank you so much. It's great to have you on.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and let's use these technologies for good.
Absolutely.
That is the final word, the last word. Okay.
Okay. Good to see you, my friend.
Bye.
Thank you.